Hello my friends, and welcome back to the Indie Fantasy Club. Today we're going to be reviewing The Oathsworn Legacy by K.R. Ganji. Now this book was published back in 2023, but I picked it up because it was a finalist in the Self-Published Fantasy Blog-Off, or the SFSP, or the SPFBO. That's a long acronym. Now, although it didn't win, it did seem like a book that was more in my preference realm, as a high fantasy, epic fantasy style of a book. Now, I do plan to read the winner of the SPFBO awards, and I'll be reviewing that in a later video. So, as a quick overview, The Oathsworn Legacy is about two brothers who are dedicated to fighting all of the evil that exists in their world. This book has everything from monster hunting to epic battles to mystery to found family bonds. It has a little bit of everything. And to me, it kind of felt like a combination of like The Witcher and maybe the Brothers Grimm. For the first half of the book, it's mostly like a short story format where you're getting very episodic events in the book. And then for the second half, it almost feels like it catches up to the present day, and we kind of go from there and things kind of slow down a little bit. Now let's see where this book falls on my indie ranking scale, shall we? I decided to give the Immersion a 7 out of 10. Besides the magical creatures, there's not a ton of world building in this story. And even a lot of the magical creatures aren't really anything new. We've got the classic dwarves, elves, wizards, djinn, and the new creatures that he does introduce, I don't feel like we get enough time with. Honestly, I would have liked to spend a lot more time with those creatures that were in that cabin.
In the bog.
Those seemed very unique and interesting and mysterious, and I'm hoping maybe there are some future stories that have something to do with that. The political landscape was relatively simple, as was the overall physical characteristics of the world itself. But I did feel like it had a really deep and rich history that gave life to this book. I just think sometimes we touched on so many different races and aspects of the world that we didn't get as much time to really dive a lot deeper into some of these stories. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I actually liked the way this book was structured, but I'm just strictly ranking this from an immersion perspective. So if you like simple, not overly complicated world building, I think this is really good. For those that have seen my other book reviews, you probably know that characters and the names are probably the most important category in my ranking system for me. And I have to give the Oathsworn Legacy an 8.5 out of 10. I loved Raleigh and Balin in this story, the two brothers. The family dynamic between those two was immediately captivating. And I personally always love seeing family relationships played out more in books. I feel like a lot of times we get the orphan trope or the found family. So actually getting a book where you get two brothers just monster hunting was so much fun for me. The tragedies and the victories these two suffered together just made it so engaging and interesting for me to read. And I liked a lot of the side characters. By the end of the book, Ganji just had my heart ripped out on a platter. He does a great job of just making all of his characters really unique and standing out from each other with their different personalities. And those relationships and the communication dynamics that they have is just so much fun. I do feel like some of the antagonists maybe needed a little bit more development. I'm actually okay with a pure evil type of a villain.
I actually like that.
But in this case, I just think it was a little bit rushed and maybe a little bit forced. I still liked it and how it played into the overall narrative, but that was just my main qualm in this section. Still overall really good. The magic was a tough one for me to rank. On the one hand, the creatures and monsters that Raleigh and Balin fight are tons of fun, but I don't know if they're necessarily very original. And magic is only really used by a few of the characters. And for the most part, it's pretty basic magic system. So with all that said, I think I have to give the magic a 7.5 out of 10. I will say that when the magic is on the pages, it's very interesting and entertaining. I think what knocked this down a little bit was just a few inconsistencies with the magic itself, especially from the chests with the tomb. I know he tries to explain how it worked, but I don't want to go into spoilers, but I do have some problems with that. It just had me questioning some of the holes in the rules. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now. You know, this is one of the reasons that I love indie authors. There's just way more creativity in how they structure their stories. Now, the chapters themselves were super long, but they were broken into smaller chunks throughout the chapter. It was almost getting like mini stories within the bigger story. So it's kind of interesting. I've never really seen anything like that, but I really liked it. So I didn't have any issues with the structure per se, but the execution was lacking in just a few areas, I think. So I have to give Infrastructure a 7 out of 10. Now, I do think people will be torn on this. For me personally, I loved the first half of the book. The short story format was excellent. I loved that we skipped past all the unnecessary travel time and conversations around a fire and just jumped right into the action. For me, it was actually really fun to skip years ahead between each chapter. It gave it an episodic feel, which meant we as readers got little mini climaxes and resolutions throughout that first half, which was great. The second half was great too, though, but that is where things slowed down a little bit, and you got to see a little bit more character development within this cast of characters that they've brought together. And this is where things started to build into a grander scheme of things, rather than just the simple monster hunting that the first half of the book really is. So with that said, I do think that the execution was just lacking with that grand scheme aspect. I think it became a little too overcomplicated, which kind of forced the author to over-explain things at the very end in order for everything else to make sense. So instead of there being a natural progression where knowledge is revealed over time, it was like an avalanche of information at the very end. Despite my qualms, I give the Oathsworn Legacy an 8 out of 10 on the enjoyment scale. I think the author did enough things right with the characters for me to overlook some of the structural issues. And I'd say the first half of the book was a 9 out of 10 for me, and the second half of the book was more like a 7 out of 10, which is why it gets that 8 out of 10 average. I just really enjoyed the episodic monster hunts, where we solved a mystery, had a climax, and learned a valuable lesson from the interaction. That's really what made this book so enjoyable for me. That and the ending was very emotional. And again, despite the issues that I raised earlier, I still really did enjoy the ending and how these various character arcs all played out. And that leaves us with an overall score of 7.6 out of 10. Because this book is structured in a very unique way, I'd say you need to go into it with an open mind if you really want to enjoy it. If you're willing to do that, then I'd highly recommend it. It might not be for everyone, but it was certainly a great read for me, and I'm glad I picked it up. Now, before we place this big fat chonker on the shelf, let's give a little bonus design review. This cover is really what got me interested in the book. This is what made me pick it up. You've got a dark tower, meteors raining down, a band of warriors facing their destiny. It just looks epic. Now, the formatting is pretty basic, but very professional and clean. But do you know what's not clean? Not giving me a map. You expect me to just chart everything in my head, dude? I can't even navigate 10 minutes from my house without Google Maps. And I've lived here for 7 years. Get a map in your next edition, pal. All right, with that said, let's get this on the shelf. The shelf is really starting to come together. It's beautiful. And that'll do it for today's video. If you haven't already, be sure to join the club. We want to build this indie fantasy community, and that starts with you. You can check out my playlist of other book reviews I've done, and I've also created videos that go into more depth of how I judge these books on my indie ranking scale, just if you want to have a little bit better idea of how things work around here. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.